At my daughter's wedding, I stood with a microphone in hand, the crystal glasses still clinking from the last toast. The air was full of soft laughter, the orchestra easing into a familiar tune. I looked around the grand ballroom, at the flowers and the chandeliers, at faces that waited for nothing more than another polite speech. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out a small recorder. My late husband, Henry, had given it to me before he passed away. With a steady breath, I pressed play. His voice, warm and unmistakable, filled the room. A man who had been gone 3 years suddenly spoke as if he had never left. The guests froze, forks hanging midair, champagne half raised. My daughter Madison's smile faltered, her groom Nathan shifted uneasily, and his mother Vivian Caldwell stiffened in her chair. You could have heard a pin drop in that moment, and as Henry's words carried across the room, I thought to myself, how did we get here? Let me back up and tell you the story. The wedding took place on a sprawling estate in Newport, Rhode Island, the kind of place people drive past slowly just to take pictures through the gates. White stone walls framed gardens that looked like they belonged in a European palace. The ocean breeze carried the smell of salt and fresh flowers, while an orchestra played beneath a silk canopy. 200 guests moved easily across the manicured lawns, glasses of champagne sparkling in their hands. I had chosen a navy dress for the occasion. It was not expensive, but it was respectable, and I believed it would be enough. That belief faded when I saw the gowns worn by the other women, shimmering fabrics paired with diamonds that could pay for a modest home. Their confidence was not in the clothes themselves but in the lives they had always known, lives where money was never questioned. Madison was radiant. She wore a vintage ivory gown that had belonged to Henry's mother, a dress I had kept safe for decades. I had thought it meant something sentimental when she asked to wear it. Instead, it was simply a costume for the perfect wedding she had long imagined. Her groom, Nathan Caldwell, stood tall beside her, smiling as if he had been born to this world of orchestras and estates. Then there was Vivian Caldwell, his mother, pearls resting on her collarbone and a smile that carried no warmth. She welcomed me politely, with words that followed all the right forms, but behind them was the unmistakable message. I was tolerated, not embraced. During the cocktail hour, I stepped onto the terrace for a breath of air. The sun had begun to set, painting the sky in streaks of pink and gold. The music from the orchestra drifted faintly through the open doors, blending with the chatter of guests. That was when I heard my daughter's voice. Madison stood near the flower arrangements with Vivian Caldwell at her side. She probably thought the music would mask her words, but I had always been blessed, or cursed, with sharp hearing. "Do not worry about her," Madison said softly, tilting her head slightly toward me. "She is just a pathetic failure. Nothing like you. She has never done anything worthwhile. 30 years working at a library. Can you imagine anything more depressing?" Vivian gave the kind of nod that cuts deeper than words. At least she knows her place. Some people from simpler backgrounds push too hard to be noticed. It is best when they stay quiet. My fingers tightened around the stem of my champagne glass until I feared it would break. Simpler backgrounds, pathetic failure, each word pierced more sharply than the last. They were speaking about me, the woman who had sacrificed so much so that Madison could stand in that very gown on that very terrace. At that moment, the hurt began to harden into resolve. A memory rose in my mind as I stood there gripping that champagne glass. It was from the last week of Henry's life. He had grown weak, his voice softer each day, but his eyes still carried that same steady light. One evening, he reached for my hand and slipped an envelope into it. "Ellie," he said, "only open this if you truly need to. Promise me. She needs to hear what I really think if she ever treats you badly." I promised, though at the time I could not imagine Madison ever speaking of me with cruelty. She had been the daughter who cried when her college rent was late, who leaned on us after a heartbreak, who sat at Henry's bedside with tears in her eyes. Surely she would never turn her back on me. But Henry had seen something I had not. In his final days, he had noticed changes in her questions, the way she spoke about money and about my future. I tucked the envelope away in my purse and carried it with me ever since. That night, listening to Madison describe me as a pathetic failure, I realized Henry had been right. He had left me more than a letter. He had left me a shield. Dinner was served in the grand hall, long tables covered with linen and silverware that gleamed beneath chandeliers. I sat at table 8, positioned far enough from the head table that I was not truly part of the celebration, but not so far that anyone could accuse Madison of leaving me out. The people seated with me were Nathan's distant relatives, polite enough, but their questions stopped short whenever the conversation turned toward me. It was clear they had been briefed to keep things light. I pushed the salmon around my plate and watched my daughter glide across the room. She shook hands, kissed cheeks, and spoke with a confidence she had been carefully building for years. Every laugh, every nod, every gracious glance was perfectly rehearsed. To the Caldwell family, she was the flawless bride, an ideal addition to their carefully crafted legacy. But I remembered another Madison, the one who used to curl up on the couch with me and ask for advice about boys. The one who begged me to stay with her through the night after nightmares. The one who clutched Henry's hand and promised she would look after me once he was gone. When the orchestra began playing The Way You Look Tonight, Henry's favorite, the guests turned to the dance floor. Nathan twirled Madison with practiced charm. She laughed, radiant, never once glancing toward the chair where I had placed Henry's photo. That was when I knew I would have to read the letter. The morning after the wedding, I drove back to Providence with Henry's letter still in my purse. My apartment felt smaller than usual, and the silence pressed in around me. I needed answers, not just emotions. So I went to the one place that had always grounded me, the public library, where I had spent 30 years of my life. Marjorie Lane, my old colleague and friend, greeted me at the front desk with her usual warmth. "How was the big wedding, Ellie? Tell me everything." I managed a thin smile. "Actually, Marjorie, I need your help." We settled into the reference room, the hum of computers and the smell of old paper familiar and comforting. I told her about a facility Madison had mentioned in passing before, one called Hawthorne Ridge. I wanted to know what kind of place it really was. Marjorie did not press for details. She understood that sometimes gathering information had to come before explanations. Together we searched public records, reviews, and state filings. At first glance, Hawthorne Ridge looked impeccable. Shiny brochures promised luxury living, community events, and lifetime security. But beneath that polish, the truth was more troubling. Families complained of high-pressure tactics, of being urged to make decisions while grieving, of signing away estates in exchange for care that often fell short of promises. Twice in the past 5 years, the state had investigated them for targeting vulnerable seniors. By the time Marjorie slid the last printout across the table, I had a folder thick with documentation. Henry's warning suddenly had context. Madison had not simply been unkind. She had been preparing something. Hawthorne Ridge was not just a plan for my future. It was a plan for my money. 2 weeks later, Madison called with a bright tone I had not heard in years. "Mom, let's have lunch." Just us. My guard immediately went up. Madison was never warm and inviting unless she had a reason. Still, I agreed. If nothing else, it would give me a chance to see what she was planning. We met at a trendy bistro in West Hartford, the kind of place that served small portions on oversized plates and made you pay for the atmosphere as much as the food. Madison arrived glowing, her tan from the honeymoon in Italy still fresh, her hair styled as if she were about to be photographed for a magazine. She kissed my cheek. "Mom, you look tired. Are you eating enough? Sleeping well? That little apartment must feel so cramped." I smiled politely and let her talk, listening as she shared stories of Italy, of Nathan's family house in the Hamptons, of the charity boards Vivian was already helping her join. It sounded less like a life and more like a performance. Finally, over coffee, she leaned forward. "Mom, Nathan and I have been talking. We are worried about your future. That neighborhood is not the safest, and the apartment is far too small. There is a wonderful community about an hour from us. Very exclusive. They almost never have openings, but a spot is free next month." I kept my voice steady. "A senior community. Madison, I am perfectly capable of living on my own." She pressed on, her smile tightening. "It is about planning ahead. You would not have to worry about money anymore. They have a program where you transfer your assets and they guarantee care for life." There it was. The very program Henry had warned me about, the same scheme Marjorie and I had researched. Madison's concern was not my safety, it was my savings. A month later, Madison called again. This time her voice was formal, almost rehearsed. "Mom, Nathan and I need to talk with you. Can you come by the house tonight?" It sounded more like a summons than an invitation. I already suspected what was coming, so I slipped Henry's letter into my purse before leaving. Their colonial home was picture perfect, every window glowing with warm light, every shrub trimmed as if it had been measured. Inside, I found Madison, Nathan, and Vivian waiting in the living room. The staging was obvious. I was seated in a chair opposite the three of them, as if on trial. On the coffee table lay a neat folder of documents. Dorothy, Vivian began with a smile that did not reach her eyes. We are concerned about you. Madison leaned in. Mom, you have seemed forgetful lately. Missing calls, rescheduling appointments. Small things, but they add up. Nathan nodded gravely. We think it might be early cognitive changes. It is nothing to be ashamed of. We just want to be proactive. I listened as they spoke, each sentence flowing like lines from a script. Finally, Nathan opened the folder and slid the papers toward me. Power of attorney, asset transfer agreements, healthcare directives. Everything needed to move you into Hawthorne Ridge next week, he explained calmly. We can handle the details, you just need to sign. The room was silent except for the ticking of a clock on the mantel. I looked at my daughter, at her polished exterior hiding the calculation underneath, and at Vivian, whose hand rested protectively on Nathan's arm. They thought they had me cornered, that fear and confusion would drive me to agree. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch. Then I reached into my purse and pulled out the envelope I had carried for so long. Henry's handwriting was faded but clear. I laid it gently on the table. Before I sign anything, I think we should hear from someone who loved me enough to tell the truth. I unfolded the paper and began to read his words aloud. The room grew still as Henry's words filled the air. My dearest Ellie, if you are reading this, then Madison has shown you who she has become. I am sorry, sweetheart. I noticed changes in her during my final weeks. She asked too many questions about our finances, about wills, about what would happen to you after I was gone. She brought me brochures from a place called Hawthorne Ridge. She called it planning ahead, but I saw calculation in her eyes. Do not let her convince you that you are a burden. You are the best thing I ever did with my life. When I finished reading, I lifted my eyes. Madison's face had drained of color. Nathan stared at her. Confusion etched across his brow. Vivian's hands were folded tightly in her lap, her smile frozen. I set the letter down. Henry was not mistaken. He saw this coming, and I did my own research. I opened the folder Marjorie had helped me build and spread the papers across the table. State investigations, complaints from families, words repeated again and again, pressured, manipulated, regret. Hawthorne Ridge does not protect residents, I said evenly. It protects its revenue stream. Madison's voice trembled. That proves nothing. Dad was sick. He might have been confused. Nathan leaned closer to the papers. These complaints are serious. Families saying they were pushed to sign over estates while grieving. Madison, did you even read these before recommending this place? She faltered, eyes darting to Vivian. I gathered the documents into a neat stack. Help, I said calmly, is when you ask someone what they want. Control is when you tell them what they will do. Right now, what I want is simple. I want my life to remain mine. Silence hung over the room, broken only by the faint hum of the heating vents. Madison stared at the carpet, as if the pattern might offer her an escape. Nathan looked from her to the papers again, his expression hardening. Vivian, always quick with polished words, was the first to recover. Dorothy, she said smoothly, let us not dwell on the past. What matters is your safety now. I stood, slipping Henry's letter back into my purse. Safety is not the issue. Independence is. I am 68, not a fragile child. I can pay my bills, cook my meals, and live in my own apartment. I will not be moved like a piece of furniture to make anyone else's life easier. Nathan rubbed his forehead, clearly unsettled. Madison's lips parted as if she wanted to argue, but no sound came out. I walked toward the door, my shoes quiet against their polished floor. At the threshold, I paused. If the day comes when I need help, I will ask for it. But it will be my choice, not yours, and certainly not Hawthorne Ridge's. The latch clicked softly behind me as I stepped into the cool night. For the first time in months, my shoulders felt light. They had tried to box me in, and I had walked out with my dignity intact. Weeks passed before I heard from Madison again. When she finally called, her voice carried none of the brightness from before. Mom, can we meet for coffee, just the two of us? No Nathan, no Vivian. Something in her tone told me this time was different. We met at a small cafe not far from the library. It was quiet, the kind of place where the clatter of cups filled the silence between words. Madison sat across from me, hair pulled back, makeup minimal. She looked younger, but also more tired, as if keeping up appearances had worn her down. She did not waste time. I have been thinking about what you said, about treating you like a problem instead of a person. I even talked to a therapist. She asked me when I first became afraid of you getting older. It started when Dad got sick. Watching him decline made me panic. I did not think I was strong enough to care for you the way you cared for him, so I convinced myself that if I found someone else to do it, I would not have to face that fear." Her eyes filled, her hands wrapped tightly around her cup. I realized she was not just calculating. She was terrified. "Madison," I said gently, "no one expects you to be a perfect caregiver, but being scared does not give you permission to control another person's life. If we plan for the future, it must be together, not behind closed doors." She nodded, silent but listening at last. A year later, my life looked very different. I still lived in my apartment in Providence, but my days had filled with new rhythm. I went to book club at the library, attended lectures at the museum, and even began seeing Robert Hale, a retired English professor I had met at a local lecture. He was kind, thoughtful, and most importantly, he treated me like an equal. Madison had changed too. Our calls became weekly, not to manage me, but to share parts of her life. Sometimes she asked about books I was reading, other times she simply wanted to talk. She was learning that a mother who lives independently is not a burden but a person with a story worth hearing. One afternoon, Nathan called and invited me to join them on a trip to Ireland the following spring. This time it was not about control. He explained that I would have my own freedom, my own space, and the invitation was offered as a gift, not an obligation. Even Vivian, once so quick to dismiss me, had shifted her tone to one of careful respect. As I folded a scarf Henry once loved into my suitcase, I realized something important. I was going because I chose to. Looking back, I see the path clearly now. At my daughter's wedding, I heard words that cut me deeply, words no mother should have to hear. Yet those words pushed me to open Henry's letter to see the truth he had left behind. His voice reminded me that dignity is not something you hand over for convenience. It is something you protect, even when it means standing alone in a room full of people who doubt you. The lesson is simple but powerful. You cannot outsource love, and you cannot outsource respect. Real care begins with listening, not with controlling. Real family asks what you want instead of deciding for you. If you ever face pressure to give up your independence, remember this story. Hold on to your voice. Hold on to your worth. And when the time comes, let your choices be your own. If my story resonated with you, tap the like button so others can find it. Share it with someone who may need the encouragement. And tell me in the comments where you are watching from, because your story matters too.